I'll talk a bit about the much publicised peace summit in Switzerland regarding Ukraine. Um, there's a lot of details with this one, so I'm going to condense it. I'm going to use Wikipedia as a reference point just for the reasons of being condensed. The Prime Minister, that is our Prime Minister, made, I thought, a good statement on this. He said that it's a cruel paradox that the things that are most worth living for are also the things that men and women are dying for in Ukraine. Um, and he pointed out the cynicism of Russia's approach to this. Russia notably wasn't at the summit, but the cynicism of Russia's a whole approach to peace in Ukraine. I mean, he pointed out on his first visit to Kiev, he found that toys had been mined. Basically, they'd been booby trapped. uh, Leaving Russian troops had left children's toys booby trapped. That shows what sort of opponent Ukraine's dealing with. I think it's fair to say there is a gulf between NATO countries and the so-called global South. It's telling that in the outbreak of the war, the invasion of Ukraine, 143 countries, including many global South countries, condemned the invasion. Um, in the end, the joint communique at this summit was 80 countries signed up, and some big powers didn't, including India, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa. Um, anyway, I'm going to read out the introduction on the Wikipedia article and a little bit about the joint communique. This was a huge summit. A lot of leaders in one location. It's more like a G20, even bigger. It's probably one of the biggest meetings of world leaders in modern times. Um, anyway, this is the article. An international peace summit in relation to the Russo-Ukrainian war, formerly called the Summit on Peace in Ukraine, was held in Bergenstock Resort in Switzerland on the 15th to the 16th of June 2024. The conference followed a series of four earlier international meetings and was hosted by the Swiss President Viola Amherd. Representatives from 92 nations and 8 international organizations attended the summit, while Russia did not participate. A joint communique became the final statement on the summit and was supported by the majority of participants. Some delegates did not endorse the joint communique. Now, many people will say this whole summit was a waste of time because Russia wasn't there. China was invited but did not turn up. I'm just going to read out the details of the joint communique if you bear with me. Um, Scrolling to the end here, there is a lot of aspects of this. I'm not reading out the whole article. Let's see. The summit took place on the 15th to the 16th of June 2024 as planned. The three main topics of focus for the summit were nuclear safety and security, freedom of navigation, and food safety, and humanitarian aspects. The final statement of the summit, titled "The Joint Communique on a Peace Framework" and referring to the ongoing war of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, was initially signed by 80 states and four international European organisations, with Jordan withdrawing on the 16th of June. Iraq also withdrew its signature on the 16th of June, as did Rwanda on the 17th of June, while Ecumenical Patriarchate signed on the 17th of June, leaving 77 signatures by states and 5 by organisations. So that's significantly less than the 143 nations that condemned Russia's invasion. Brazil, India, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia, participants in the summit, with Brazil as an observer, did not sign the communique. The joint communique declared support for UN General Assembly resolutions ARES-ES 11/1 and ARES-ES 11 /6 and for the Charter of the United Nations. The communique reaffirmed the signees' commitment to refraining from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, the principles of sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all states, including Ukraine, within their internationally recognized borders, including territorial waters, and the resolution of disputes through peaceful means as principles of international law. The communique declared that the signees would undertake concrete steps in the future with further engagement in the representatives of all parties. Zelensky said that he would have another peace summit tomorrow if Russia would withdraw troops. In his closing speech for the summit, Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo stated that in many ways Africa was the greatest victim of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Well, that's a bit of a slight towards Ukrainian civilians, I would say. He called for Russian and Chinese participation in the peace process. Akufo-Addo stated that Ghana viewed the Russian invasion as a great power hegemony and the bullying of small states by big powers. He's right about that, to which Ghana is opposed. Chilean President Gabriel Boric said in his closing speech for the summit that Chile wanted Russia and Ukraine to soon engage in dialogue with respect to the territorial integrity of Ukraine, international law, and a firm commitment to human rights as a fundamental standard. Tell that to Russian soldiers torturing Ukrainian POWs. He stated the summit was not about NATO, not about right or left political ideas, not about northern or southern countries. It was a respect of international law and human rights, foundational principles of living together. This is applicable in Ukraine, in Gaza, and in any other conflict in the world. Now, let's be under no illusions, this summit's probably not going to achieve a great deal. Crucially, though, it's not a Western summit. This wasn't like the G7 meeting in Italy a day before. I think it's fair to say now that G7 summits are becoming less significant in the world than what they once were. This was the 50th G7 summit, hosted by Giorgia Meloni, and they are not carrying the same weight as G20 summits. I remember back in 2005, it was a big thing, the G7 summit, G8 summit, as it then was. Less so nowadays. It's probably Rishi Sunak's last events as a world leader. He's had a busy few weeks, but this will be his last events. Just on a side note, he seems to have formed something of a special relationship with Italy's Giorgia Meloni, so that's going to be something that will be remembered from the Sunak era. But it is important that this summit wasn't just Western countries, condemning Russia. There were a lot of countries involved. Why did countries like India, Brazil, etc., not sign that final communique officially? According to Al Jazeera, it was the presence of Israel in the event. It was also the absence of Russia. Now, it is valid to say that if you have two warring parties, if one of them isn't invited, then it isn't going to go very far. But what I have a big problem with is the premise that a lot of countries put on Ukraine, whereby it should somehow have peace at any price. And I would ask if Narendra Modi or Lula da Silva, Cyril Ramaphosa, or other leaders in global South nations, if they would accept their territorial integrity being questioned, if they would have peace at any price. So, for example, if India has a border conflict with China and China takes a chunk of Indian territory, would Modi cave in? Of course he wouldn't. So I think it's a bit hypocritical of those leaders to be lecturing Ukraine on, oh, well, peace at any price, basically, is what they're saying. I think that's fundamentally wrong. There needs to be a basic recognition here that Russia is the aggressor. And I also think it's worth noting that Ukrainians don't want war. I'm sure a lot of Ukrainians really would want peace, but not peace at any price. If it means giving up a big chunk of their country, if it means allowing Putin to just have the green light to do as he pleases, that is not really a true peace. What about the thousands of Ukrainian children kidnapped, sent to Russia, which is a genocidal act because its intention is to erode Ukrainian nationhood and Ukrainian identity? This issue of sovereignty is an extremely important one, and I think a lot of global South nations are being hypocritical in lecturing Ukraine and sort of saying, oh, well, the Ukrainians should just accept peace. I also think that anti-NATO prejudice is part of the problem here. They look at this through the prism of, well, NATO staunchly supports Ukraine, so we need to make a stand against NATO. But Ukraine is a relatively small country, a very brave country, but a relatively small country compared to Russia, that has been subjugated, brutalized, even as the summit was going on, Kharkiv and other cities were being hit by Russian strikes. I have never ever wavered on my views on this. And, I'm under no illusions it's likely going to achieve little, but the very fact that Russia's premise for peace is to basically take a big chunk of Ukrainian territory, to lie about their role in the war. Remember, they didn't even call it a war, they called it the special military operation. Um, Putin has shown he cannot be trusted. The man's a liar. He's an irredentist obsessive. Um, so, war is a terrible thing. I hope there can be peace in Ukraine, but I think peace at any price is not a true peace. And that's the issue here. Um, so it's not going to end anytime soon, possibly not this year, probably not this year. I think the only way this war ends is when all Russian troops move out. And unfortunately, it's probably going to go on for some time yet. But this could end tomorrow if Russia withdraws now. Putin has got himself into a position where if he does that, he'll look weak. And it's now this twisted situation where he almost has to stay for his domestic survival because he's got himself into a situation where there's powerful hawks around him that would jump at the chance to replace him in the Kremlin. We saw that last year with the Prigozhin revolt. So it's a very messy situation. But I think, for global South countries to lecture Ukraine, it's very hypocritical, and it really angers me when they try to blame NATO. It wasn't NATO that invaded Russia; it was Russia that invaded Ukraine. As for the expansion of NATO, this is something that's sometimes brought up. Sovereign states like Sweden and Finland have absolutely the right to choose their own destiny. This idea that countries should cave into Russia, it's obscene. As for the Russo-Chinese relationship, clearly it's a very, very important relationship, but it may not be that. I mean, it's clear Russia's the junior partner. It may be that over time cracks start to appear. Who knows? And on a final, somewhat related note, Sir Rod Stewart was given a concert in Leipzig in Germany, and there was an image of Zelensky, and that support for Ukraine, and he was booed. Now, that's surprising. That was in Germany. I think there may be some Western war fatigue and cynicism about continued support for Ukraine. I think this would be a grave, grave mistake because the echoes of the 1930s here are profound. It's just like, the Third Reich going into the Sudetenland and saying, we'll stop there, and they never did. I firmly believe that if Putin is given an inch, he'll take a mile. I firmly believe that. This only ends when Russia withdraws, which means, unfortunately, it's going to last for some time yet. The G7's agreed a £50 billion package for Ukraine, but I would just say that if any of those global South countries are attacked by a neighbour, then maybe they'll realise that lecturing Ukraine isn't so valid on territorial integrity, because you can be damn sure that they would be very vocal on issues of territorial integrity. But it also shows the reverberations around the world regarding food security and so on. So there is a vested interest for the international community to put pressure on Russia to end this. Russia can end it. Like I say, it puts Putin in a difficult position politically, but it's just a damning indictment of his legacy that he has created this war and he's created so much suffering. And I have nothing but respect for the Ukrainian people. And as for Zelensky, I see a man with the weight of such weight on his back, and he's shown such. I do think he's shown personal bravery and leadership. He's not perfect, no leader is, but all those who mock and ridicule Zelensky, this is a man who's done his level best to fight for his country. Any leader in his position would do the same thing. I defy other world leaders to claim otherwise. As for me, I've never beat around the bush with this. I support Ukraine 100%. And I think the only way this ends is for full Russian withdrawal. Saying, oh, okay, Ukraine should just give up the Donbass or big chunks of territory, it's utterly unreasonable. Also, it would be dishonouring the thousands of Ukrainian troops that have died fighting for the country. Plus, it means uh, being under Russian subjugation. I just don't think it's morally plausible.